So, hello and welcome to another short instalment of Conflict on Camera, and we are back in Normandy today, having been off to the Russian front for a photo of a knocked out German armoured vehicle in the Sainte-Mère-Église area in June in 1944. And joining me from the Netherlands is WW2TV friend and fan Niels. Welcome to the show, Niels.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you know your stuff, Niels. In terms of German armour, you know your stuff. And for those watching, Niels is in the middle of producing a 2-volume account of the Germans in La Manche in Normandy in 1944, which I think will become the definitive book on that subject. So we are talking about this photo now. So Niels, this is one of several photos of knocked out vehicles around that town of Sainte-Mère-Église in June. This one has got lots of stuff in it, from the road to the vehicle to the anti-tank gun. So what are we looking at exactly?
What we are looking at are a couple of things. Obviously, we have a destroyed German anti-tank vehicle, or a Sturmgeschütz, and to the right we have a Allied American anti-tank gun. And what we're looking at is the result of the fighting on D+1, June 7th, 1944. And we are just on the outskirts of Sainte-Mère-Église. Photos of the destroyed vehicles are quite common, but what exactly is going on and the unit these belong to is something that is almost always misidentified. So first of all, the anti-tank gun. The anti-tank gun is usually identified as a American 57mm anti-tank gun, which is almost true. It's in fact a British 6-pounder anti-tank gun specifically modified for to be transported by air. This particular piece belonged to A Company of the 80th Anti-Aircraft Anti-Tank Battalion, which was part of the 82nd Airborne Division. And it had landed during Mission Detroit in a Waco glider. The anti-tank vehicle, the German vehicle, is also very interesting, because what we are seeing here is the most serious German attempt on the peninsula to defeat the invasion. June 6th, the Germans tried to bring up troops. They already had tried to take Sainte-Mère-Église. They had been given a bloody nose at Neuville-au-Plain. And they realized June 7th is going to be the last moment we have any chance of defeating the invasion in this particular sector of Normandy. So that's what they started to prepare for. And this particular attack was one of 3 that the Germans had been planning. From the south, they had hoped to attack with the Fallschirmjäger Regiment 6 from the Carentan area, which became a complete disaster when one of their battalions was basically cut off just southwest of Saint-Marie-du-Mont and destroyed. From the west, they tried to attack with a 3rd regiment, the 1057 regiment, which attacked La Fière, which also got nowhere. And from the north, they tried 2 different attacks. This one along the highway directly towards Sainte-Mère-Église, and another one towards the east with a reinforced regiment. Now, they had already been bringing up reinforcements, in particularly from the 243rd Infantry Division. They had sent a makeshift regiment towards the coast to attack south towards Utah Beach. And here along the highway, they sent in elements to reinforce elements of the 91st Air Landing Division, which was at the time operating under the 709th Infantry Division, which was in itself responsible for the Utah Beach sector. And they sent in a number of supportive units. That this included heavy artillery, but also elements of their anti-tank battalion. And that's a vehicle we're seeing here. I know a lot of books typically identify this vehicle as an anti-tank piece from the 709th Infantry Division, but that division did not have assault guns, and this is an assault gun. So this particular vehicle belonged to 2nd Company of the anti-tank battalion of the 243rd Infantry Division. Oh, there are 10 of these vehicles. They had received them in March and stationed closer to the west coast. And for this purpose of this attack, they were shifted to the control of the 709th Infantry Division. But also their 1st Company of the same battalion was also involved with their Marder 3 self-propelled anti-tank guns. When several were also lost in the fighting around Sainte-Mère-Église and Neuville-au-Plain on the same day. So that's basically what was going on, how the Germans set up the German plans for that particular day.
So just to recap, Niels, the label of it being the 709th Division, I think, is one of those ones that gets repeated from book to book to book and just doesn't get checked out.
Indeed.
And also, in terms of the attacks on Sainte-Mère-Église, and it's interesting, we did the show with Marty Morgan about John Steele landing or not landing on the church tower. that stretch of road around Sainte-Mère-Église, of course, because the tourists now come up and they go into the town of Sainte-Mère-Église and they stop, they look at the museum, the actual stretch of road, that part of the N13 has now been widened, as I think people tend to avoid looking at that sector now because you can't quite get to some of those locations because of the way the road works. So I think those counterattacks on the town have been in some ways overlooked and emphasis put on other things such as the fighting in the square, which isn't in any way as important as what was actually happening on the highway itself. And that, of course, brings into the importance of Sainte-Mère-Église as being a crossroads town, which is the whole point. The 82nd Airborne was seizing it. It wasn't anything to do with the town square or the church. It was because it sat on a very important, vital crossroads. And that's therefore why the Germans, as you said at the top of the show there, are trying desperately to retake that crossroads so they have some means of getting towards Utah Beach and doing something about the invasion. So I just wanted to sort of clarify that before we move on. But back to the details in the photo.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Sainte-Mère-Église was already on D-Day recognized by the Germans to be the focal point of the Allied effort behind Utah Beach. They realized it's absolutely vital we take this. If we take this, we have a fighting chance. If not, we're in very big trouble, and which is indeed what happened after this date was basically over. So the Germans set up their defenses on the evening of June 6th. They organized for the attack on the 7th, and they made two battalions available, which was later reinforced by a slightly more elite assault battalion, not an assault gun battalion, but an infantry unit of the 7th Army. So there were three battalions basically getting ready to attack Sainte-Mère-Église from the north, a very formidable force facing paratroopers, which had actually at the time were still isolated. So a very grave threat indeed.
And just again to clarify, we also know the 82nd Airborne had lost the majority of their anti-tank guns, either not landed in the right place or they've been damaged in glider landings, and I forget what percentage it is, but they haven't got anything like the number they wanted to have there. So seeing that 6-pounder there, that's one of the very few that actually was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but they probably already lost two at Neuville-au-Plain the previous day. So they're getting shorter and shorter in anti-tank guns. So this is a vital position with one of the few remaining anti-tank guns. This is absolutely crucial to hold the northern edge of the town. So what we're seeing here is, like I said, an anti-tank gun from A Company. It was commanded by Lieutenant John C. Cliff. And what they did was, when the Germans started to approach over the highway, because vehicles were roadbound, they started to engage them. They took out some vehicles, they believed they were trucks, and then at some point it became clear that the Germans were starting to move in their armor. Before they could engage them, the Germans started to lay a smoke screen to move the armor forward. So they came under the cover of smoke, they approached the American position, and when the assault gun came out, the anti-tank gun opened fire. And that's when it started to place several hits on the vehicle. They say they hit it 4 times in total, knocking it out. And what we can also see on this particular photo is you can see the holes in the front. In total, you can count about 7 areas of damage. You have the roof of the vehicle that has been blown off and landed on its side inside the fighting compartment, which is rather typical damage for an assault gun, because the 2 hits on the front of the vehicle, if they penetrate, there's a storage of ammunition behind that. So that's quite possibly where it hit. This particular vehicle was vehicle 201, the company commander's vehicle, although it's doubtful that he actually was in it at the time of the attack, because he died later. But in this way, they knocked out the vehicle. But the problem was, there was still more armor on the highway in the distance. And now this vehicle was blocking the line of sight of the anti-tank gun. So what they did, they manhandled the gun forward and placed it at where you can see it right now. But before they could do anything else, another German assault gun to the back opened fire on it. And it's quite possibly that it damaged the rear wheel of the German assault gun, which you can also see here, because it's at an angle. So that's possibly a part of the damage. But more importantly, the shot of the German anti-tank gun took out the gun crew. So now you have still German armor coming up. The anti-tank gun is out of action. And so you're in bigger trouble than you had been before. And that's where John E. Ashley comes in. This was a private from H Company 505th. He had been in position nearby. He noticed what happened, and he rushed towards the anti-tank gun and took it over all by himself. And as he was doing that, the other assault gun approached. He loaded the piece, he aimed it, and he fired 2 shots at it. And in that way, he knocked it out. You can also see this particular second vehicle because it's just to the left, upper left of the anti-tank gun. And with this action, he basically fought off the German armored attack. They realized their anti-tank defensive, effective anti-tank defenses, so you're not going to try rushing them again. And this is when the Germans could only use their armor as artillery pieces, but no longer as a force to breach the American lines. So this is absolutely vital for the survival of Sainte-Mère-Église at this particular point, when you must also imagine that there is an infantry battalion, German infantry battalion, to the right and to the left of the road. So there is still going to be a lot of fighting, but now the Americans don't have to worry about the armor as much anymore. And it's also for a very good reason that because of this, Private Edgley received the Distinguished Service Cross, and the original commander of the anti-tank gun, Lieutenant John C. Cliff, received the Silver Star. Both their actions were absolutely crucial to the survival of the troops at Sainte-Mère-Église, because if those Germans had been able to swarm into town, it would have been an incredibly bloody battle, hand-to-hand fighting, and in this way, they sort of saved enough time to be able to allow the American reinforcements to come in. This is indeed what happened, and this is also probably evidence for that in this particular photo. Because if you look at the anti-tank vehicle, you can see it has about 7 areas of damage, but the anti-tank gun only fired 4 rounds, they say. And that's quite possibly true because the 746th Tank Battalion, which arrived in the course of the afternoon, claimed quite a few German armored vehicles that day. And I suspect that they opened fire on this particular vehicle. They turned onto the highway. They saw a German vehicle in their sights. They didn't wait to see what was going on, and they just opened fire on it, pumped a few more rounds in it just to be sure, and then thundered up the road to confront the remaining German armor, which they, for a part later, bypassed and took out several more pieces in and around the Neuville-au-Plain.
And so interestingly, does the 746th, after action reports, do they refer to knocking out this particular vehicle and thinking they knocked it out?
Well, like so many Allied reports, they're not very good in identifying enemy vehicles. They're talking about several Panzer IVs, which almost certainly refers to the German assault guns, the Sturmgeschütz, which are quite big, quite square, quite bulky. So I assume that they're referring to the Panzer IVs with these. There's also talk of self-propelled guns, which they indeed encountered the martyrs in Neuville-au-Plain. So their claims are quite close to the total number of German vehicles lost on that day, which are basically 3 assault guns, 3 Sturmgeschütze, and 3 Marder 3 self-propelled Pak 40 anti-tank guns. And there's also another interesting bit which you can see in the photo of the other wreck, the one actually knocked out, because in the distance there is a vehicle, a Sherman, which has lost one of its tracks. And that vehicle did not belong to the 746th Tank Battalion, but to the C Company of the 70th Tank Battalion. And this is still a bit peculiar because it's very difficult to understand when these particular units arrived, when they moved in. We do know that C Company of the 70th Tank Battalion lost 2 tanks that day, and one of them indeed was lost track damage. So that's probably the vehicle we're seeing here. And one of the lieutenants, Lieutenant Tai, was killed when his own tank flipped over further north on the highway, which is quite peculiar if you consider where the German tanks were of armor was at that time. And it's still something I would like to one day figure out how this happened at all. But that's why we can also see in the photos of German armor north of Sainte-Mère-Église, we can also see evidence of 2 damaged Germans, but these did belong to C Company 70th Tank Battalion and not to what I had first expected, at least for one of them, the 746th Tank Battalion.
Well, thanks for bringing this to our attention, Niels. And the 2 points that I'm thinking of are, one is that, again, we've talked about it before in other shows, the focus on what happened in the square in Sainte-Mère-Église and the heroes there is maybe taking away the emphasis from other heroes who are actually, as you say, knocking out German vehicles that are really trying to retake that part of the beachhead. And as we said, by June the 6th, June the 7th, there is still a lot of vulnerability in the Allied sector in that area. Although we have seized, or the Allies have seized a lot of the areas, we haven't got enough people there, there's not enough heavy weapons, and there's still lots of Germans around, and it still could have started unraveling. It's a domino effect, it's a house of cards. if you lose one bit of road, you maybe lose a second bit of road, and suddenly the beachhead you've claimed starts becoming untenable. So that's very interesting. And second, also this idea, thanks to people like yourself, of going back and reanalyzing this information we have about which German unit was where and which American unit was where, because unfortunately over the years these have been well reproduced, these photos, in numerous books, in numerous documentaries, numerous YouTube shows, and the misidentification gets perpetuated. The general misunderstanding of the engagements they're involved in gets confused, and it's good to go back, as you've done, Niels, and take it right back to basics. Look at all the documents, look at all the evidence, and I know you've done incredible work looking at all those photos of the Allied captured field parks, all those areas we dragged all the German vehicles to after the campaign. You studied all those photos and matched up the damage and matched up all the identifying features to kind of locate which vehicle was hit where and where it was dragged to and which unit it belonged to. So sterling stuff, Niels. And how are you getting on with your books?
Well, it's basically finished. It's being proofread right now. I'm doing some more tweaks, and I'm doing some work on the illustrations and some of the graphics and on tables. And so it's basically small stuff to get it done. And I hope to have it ready around D-Day this summer, so fingers crossed.
Well, I want you to promise to come back on WW2TV and talk about your book or the books when they're available, so we can get everyone interested in it and buying it, because, as we've said many times before, there's a distinct lack of accurate information about the German side, and without understanding the German side, there's no way we can understand fully the Allied side until you have both sides of the picture. So I hope you'll undertake the promise and come back and talk about it.
Absolutely.
Superb. So thank you very much for watching this episode of Convict on Camera. I've enjoyed it. It's good to talk about some armour. And Niels is the guy to talk about it with in terms of German armour in Normandy. So thank you very much for joining us, Niels.